Hello everybody and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast. The best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. I'm coming at you today from a sunny and very hot Bangkok in Thailand, and I'm very happy to be talking with you again. Hope you're ready for a nice episode. I'm very positive and happy, like I usually am. Or we could also say I'm optimistic. I'm feeling very optimistic today. And partly because I know this is going to be a great episode, but also because that's the topic of today's episode. So it only makes sense that I feel aligned, kind of matched up with this topic today. So yes, today I'm going to be talking all about optimism, pessimism, and realism. These are the three key words from this lesson today. From this lesson, it's not really a lesson, it's a podcast. It's an episode. So it's going to be hopefully fun and enjoyable and not like a lesson. So let's try to avoid that word. But I guess we'll get right into it, and I will talk a little bit about the definitions to begin with. So I think we're going to go over nouns and then adjectives. So many of you may know there are sometimes two versions of nouns. One noun can refer to the concept, the idea of something. Another noun can refer to the person who shows that characteristic. I'll show you what I mean. So let's look at this word optimism. Optimism is a noun, and it is the idea or the feeling of being positive, feeling positive and happy about the future. So when you look at the future, optimism is expecting the best possible outcome. So optimism is the idea, really, the concept. The person who has this feeling is called an optimist. Optimist. Right, so I am an optimist. You'll see that pattern a lot, that IST, in like dentist and many other areas as well that aren't coming to my head right now, but feel free to let me know more in the comments. But IST just means a person who does something or a person who shows something. So optimist. And quite simply, if you want to use the adjective, maybe this is the most useful version, we add ick on the end, IC. So I am an optimist. I feel optimistic. Optimistic. So once again, if you feel optimistic, you feel positive and you expect good things to happen. Really nice thing to be, in my opinion. Let's look at the opposite now. You might know this one as well. And this is the idea of pessimism. Pessimism. So pessimism is, as I said, the opposite. It's expecting that bad and negative things will happen. If someone always complains about, oh, I'm not going to do well, I'm going to fail my exam, that is an example of pessimism. And what do you think we could call these people? I know you already know, right? You're guessing maybe? This person is a pessimist. Pessimist. The rules in this structure, they're really nice and consistent, always the same. And of course, that person would be pessimistic. A little bit longer, pessimistic. Lots of S's in there. So think for yourself, be honest, are you more of an optimistic person or a pessimistic person? When you think about the future, whether it's your life or the world, the planet's future, do you feel optimistic or pessimistic? I will answer that question for myself in just a second. The final one, which is often included in these, and it's quite nice because it has the same grammar pattern, is realism. Realism, right? And this has the word real, so it should be understandable to some extent. And realism, or a person who is a realist, might see situations as they are. They're not being optimistic or pessimistic. They're not looking in a particular way. They're just seeing the truth as it is. And they're looking at it in a practical way. So if you're very optimistic, you might think, yeah, tomorrow's going to be amazing. If you're pessimistic, you think, oh, it's going to be a really bad day tomorrow. If you're realistic, you might have something in the middle, kind of like, well, tomorrow is just going to be what I make of it, you know? Tomorrow is going to happen, it's going to rain, it's going to be sunny, and all of that is just fact. You know, it's very like logical, almost like emotionless point of view in some ways. But we might come back to that later as well. So yeah, once again, think about which one that you are. And yeah, we're going to talk about in a minute how you can be more optimistic, because it's of course very nice to be happy and optimistic in life. But for now, I want to talk about pessimism very briefly, just to try to give both sides an equal, a fair argument, let's say. I guess I rarely hear this point of view, but I suppose some people could argue that pessimism could be useful, or it could be a good thing in some ways. I'll give you some examples and let me know what you think of these. So one possible benefit of being pessimistic, being negative about the future, is it might be more motivational. Many of us are motivated by, what's the word? It's almost like proving people wrong. I can say that's true when I started teaching personally. A lot of people in my area around me were somewhat pessimistic about my chances of teaching online. And they weren't saying it wouldn't work, but I could just tell by their voice that they didn't really believe in me. And it was just kind of like, oh, okay, interesting. Well, see how it goes, and then if it doesn't work, you can come back and work at this job. You know, I had a few reactions like that. I'll never forget them. And personally, that really motivated me because I wanted to prove them wrong. Like, there's no way I can come back to a job when someone is talking to me in that way. You know, it's not quite rude, but they didn't believe in me, which was a little bit sad. So I think pessimism may work in the same way if you are thinking about failing in the future. You're thinking about bad things. Let's think about the future. Think about climate change and all these possible scenarios that might go wrong in the future. That's very scary, and it might motivate us to make a change and work to fight these problems. Conversely, which means in the opposite way, if you're very optimistic, you think the future is going to be great, then maybe you don't have much motivation to improve it because you already expect it to be good. So I suppose there's some argument there. That's one benefit of pessimism, maybe. And maybe there's a balance of pessimism and optimism to find in life. And another possible benefit of being pessimistic is that you might be more prepared for the difficult times in your life, more prepared for the tough times. Because one thing that comes with optimism very often is, this is quite a hard word to pronounce, but this is usually pronounced naive. Naive. That's the adjective, or the noun is even harder, naivety. Naivety. That's quite a hard one. And it's usually got these little symbols above the letters here, but it's just pronounced naive rather than naive. It's kind of two syllables, right? So if you are naive, it's kind of like you have a very innocent view of the world. You don't really see the bad in the world. And a lot of people will, let's say, they will view optimistic people in a negative way, maybe pessimistic way, quite confusingly. And they will say optimistic people are just naive. It's very naive to think that only good things will happen. There's a lot of pain and bad things in the world, and if you're an optimist, you're kind of a bit stupid. You're naive. Naive is like a little bit stupid. You're so innocent that you're not very smart. That's what it means. So I don't necessarily believe that, but a lot of people do say that you might have this naive optimism. Even though things are going really badly, you're kind of covering your ears and going, no, it's going to be fine. It's all going to be good. It's got no problems here. So there is a level of optimism that can lead to naivety and ignorance. Another good word there. Ignorance is when you're ignoring something, right? You're ignoring the facts of a situation. So if you're an ignorant, naive person, it's not really a good thing to be, right? By the way, I am mentioning a lot of somewhat advanced words today. I think they're useful words, but advanced words. So if you want some extra help with these, don't forget there's always more help on the members website. There's vocab lists, definitions. You can listen to the audio, practice your knowledge with a quiz. There's a quiz with every podcast episode. And this is available for members. So if you want to find out more, you can sign up at levelupenglish.school. There's also a link in your podcast description. Wherever you're listening, look at the description and there's a link to sign up or find out more. And of course, if you do sign up, there's bonus things such as group classes where you can chat to me and learn English with me. And as I said, podcast transcripts as well. Many things like that. But yeah, anyway, back to the topic. So if you are naive and you're optimistic, you may not really think too much about tough times coming up in your life. You may expect only good things to happen. And if you're pessimistic, you're very aware that bad things will happen. And this reminds me of a phrase, a saying that I really, really like. It's really useful to me. And this is prepare for the worst, hope for the best. I think that's a really nice thing to remember in life. So don't ignore that bad things happen. You can prepare for the bad times, but hope for the good times. I think that's a nice attitude. At least for me, it's a nice attitude to have in life. And yeah, perhaps if you're aware that bad things will happen at some point, you will be more mentally prepared. If tomorrow all of you stop listening to my podcast and I have to change my work, I'll be very sad. Of course, I hope you don't stop listening. But maybe if I'm expecting it's a possibility, I won't be too upset. I'm not going to be really depressed because I knew it was a possibility. I wasn't too optimistic. I was maybe more realistic about the situation. So there's that. Here's a quote about realism now before we get onto optimism. I read this online and it's, the pessimist complains. The optimist hopes for change. The realist adjusts the situation. Okay, so this is obviously a very, this is written by a realist, right? It's very sided with realism. But yeah, it's kind of pessimism is just complaining, it's not useful. Optimism is just hoping, which is also not useful. Realism is the only practical solution, according to this person. And that's the realist is someone who takes action to improve the situation, make it better, and they're not hoping or complaining. So that's one point of view of realism. But other people also argue that realism is not really connected. It's kind of binary, which means two sides. Remember, if you hear that word bi, B-I, it means two, like bicycle, two wheels. So binary, two sides. And some people argue that there's optimism and pessimism, and everyone is somewhere on that scale between those two. And realism isn't really connected. So that's another point of view. And I kind of believe that more personally. I am definitely more optimistic, just naturally. I'm quite optimistic. Even during the bad times, I'm kind of thinking, well, after a bad time, there's always going to be a good thing that happens. After a storm, there's the sun that comes later, right? But of course, if you're a pessimist, you're going to be thinking about the next storm. So it just depends on your point of view, really. And in my opinion, they're both valid, which means they both make sense. I don't think it's wrong to be pessimistic or optimistic, but I do think we should go with the one that makes us happier, right? That's what most of us want. We want to be happy in life, and probably optimism is going to be the method to make you happier. So let's talk a little bit about how to be optimistic. So I thought of some tips, and I've also researched some advice on what you can do in your life to invite more positivity and more optimism in. So here's one that I like to do myself, and this is to question whether things have improved in the past. So this can be in your life, or it could be a longer time scale, like 100 years or so. And it depends. If something really bad is happening in your life at the moment, this might not be the answer. But I think generally, for most people and most countries, things improve over time. If you look at many different criteria over the last 100 years, let's say, many things are improving. Wealth and poverty is decreasing. Generally, in most countries, it's decreasing. Access to clean water and internet and this kind of stuff, and equality as well. That's a big one. There's still some way to go for equality in terms of race and gender, people being treated equally. But I think we would rather live in 2024 than 1960s when it comes to equality. So I think these things are improving. And then look at your own life. Do you think your life now is better than it was 5-10 years ago? Maybe. Many of you might say yes. I hope you will say yes. And if not, be optimistic. There's always time to improve. But my point here is that if you look at the past and you can acknowledge, you can see that the past has improved, then why won't it happen in the future too? I meet many people who don't really see this, and I try to debate them on this topic, where they might agree that the past is always improving and it's getting better, and we've got a lot of good things happening now, like medical advances and other stuff. But then they kind of expect the future to go really badly. And I think it's a natural instinct to feel that way. But if we predict the future, the best thing we can use is what's happened before. So if you agree that the past has got better, then why not think the same for the future as well? If that didn't work for you, here's another one. Okay, so that may not have, that may not have got everyone to agree with me. But how about this one? So sometimes, or usually, our own attitude influences the outcome. This is huge. So in other words, positive expectations are more likely to lead to positive results. And I think this is amazing, and it just shows the power of the mind. The Buddha has a quote, I believe it's from the Buddha, and it's, this is from my head, so it's something like, nothing is good or bad, the mind makes it so. So that's kind of relevant. That might not be exactly what it was, but it's something like that. And I think it's all just showing the power of the mind to influence the outcome, but also just how you view things can influence whether it's good or bad, right? For example, rain. It could be good if you're thinking about the plants growing and the ground and the climate. But if you're thinking about your clothes and your hairstyle, then maybe the rain is bad. So rain, it just depends on your point of view, doesn't it? But what I really mean by this point, I'll give you an example that I remember from school. A friend from school who is still a good friend to this day. We've been friends for, probably 25 years at this point. And he is a very nice guy now, but in school, I remember him always being quite pessimistic. Right? He was always quite pessimistic, and especially when it came to trying new things or taking an exam, every single time before we took an exam, he would say, "Oh, I am so going to fail this exam. I'm really going to do badly on this exam." And usually he did do quite badly, to be honest. Just like me, I wasn't a great student either. We were quite similar, I would say, in our outcomes. But I noticed that at the time, like he was always very negative and pessimistic. And it seemed obvious to me that his expectation made it more likely for him to fail. Whereas if you're more positive, you're more likely to succeed. Do you believe that? I really believe there's some truth in that. And maybe you've experienced it with language learning as well. I feel this all the time. I recently went on another podcast called Nihongo for You, where I spoke only in Japanese on the podcast. And I'll be totally honest, just to be, I'm sure you can relate to this. Before the podcast, I was feeling quite negative about my Japanese ability. And I think it's because I used to be better and I kind of practiced a little bit less, and I feel like I'm worse than I was maybe 2 years ago. And I was feeling quite negative about it. And if you listen to that podcast episode, maybe you can hear I'm very, very unsure. I'm really lacking confidence. And because I had such low confidence and I was feeling quite pessimistic about my language abilities, I probably sounded worse than I could have. Whereas if I were to be more positive and optimistic, like, yes, I can do this, I'm going to be really good, confident, I'm going to make, the best podcast episode ever, then I think it would have had a much nicer outcome. So, I am telling you stuff that I believe, but this is not exactly stuff that I do. So another expression that we often use is do as I say, not as I do. So a lot of teachers can use that when they might know how to do something, but maybe they don't do it themselves, which is very true for me. But let me know if you can relate to that problem. Let's look at a couple more ideas on how to be optimistic. Of course, optimism is very useful for many reasons. It can make you less stressed. It can give you good health. And one example of that is when you are doing something difficult, you're faced with a challenge. If you're pessimistic, you might go, "Oh no, this is horrible. What am I going to do?" You get really stressed about it. If you're optimistic, you might kind of view the challenge as a learning opportunity, which I try to do as much as I can. Like, okay, this is going to be tough, but I know I can do it. It's going to be fine. And I'm going to come out the other side stronger, wiser, and smarter as well. So that's very optimistic, and it's going to make you less stressed, isn't it? So that's nice. Apparently, there was a study done. Let me find the source of this study from Indeed.com. That's a kind of website where you can find a job. And people who are optimistic may have been shown, it says may, to earn more money. So people who are optimistic and positive in their social interactions helps them advance their careers and earn more money. So that's an interesting one. Can you make more money by being positive? So here are a few more things you can do to encourage positivity and optimism in your life. One of these is keeping a gratitude journal. This is a nice way to write down things that you're grateful for, things you're thankful for, you appreciate. And I think it can be quite nice as well, not only to write down what you're grateful for, but the things that even you're struggling with. And that might seem like a weird thing to do, to practice optimism, but I think it can be really, really helpful to look back on the past. So imagine you can see what you were struggling with 1 year ago. It may be something that right now you're really, really finding difficult. You don't know how you're going to overcome it. But 1 year from now, 1 year in the future, probably you won't even be thinking about this problem anymore. Right? It's going to be like a distant memory. And seeing that in your gratitude journal, seeing that you can overcome these difficult problems can give you such great confidence about your own abilities and make you much more optimistic for the future. And no matter what problem you face, you have the power and the strength to overcome it. I don't write a daily journal, but I do write down sometimes when I'm in the mood, I do some writing. And I look back over my previous entries from years ago, and the things that I was worried about seem so silly to me now, which kind of makes me feel quite happy that the things I'm worried about now will also be silly to future Michael. So maybe you'll feel the same. Another one, which is perhaps quite obvious, but maybe it's something that we need to think consciously about, and this is being around positive people. It's no secret that the people around us have a big influence on who we are. I think that's one reason I love being here in Thailand, because the people I meet are generally really open-minded, positive, and I'm surrounding myself now with people who are really into fitness, health, self-improvement, and it's definitely having an effect on me. And, you know, I'm not saying you should get rid of all your friends who don't have this effect on you, but you might consider not spending all your time with people who make you feel pessimistic. You know, do your friends always complain? And how does that make you feel? Really think about that. I used to be in a workplace where all of my co-workers would complain every single day. They'd always complain about the future, complain about the work that we're doing. And that kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm more sensitive than others, but personally, I found that really difficult. That was the hardest part of the job for me. It's just being in like a negative cloud of energy and, you know, trying to, you know, mentally fight against it was really tough for me. If everyone around you is negative, it's really, really hard to be positive. So that's good. And of course, it goes both ways, right? If you can be positive towards other people, you're more likely to get positive reactions. So if you greet someone and you look sad or awkward, you might get a sad or awkward reply. But if you greet someone like, hello, how are you? Great to see you. What have you been doing? How are your kids? You know, very, very positive and happy. You're much more likely to receive that same energy in return. So what you give out into the world, you get back in return. Another great reminder for me, as well as hopefully you. So that's nice. And I think let's do two more things now. One other thing on my list here is practice seeing the good in challenging situations. So we can practice, or we can learn a great expression here, which is the silver lining. To see the silver lining. So when you look at a rain cloud, actually I can look at one right now. I wish you could see this out my window. Maybe I'll put a picture on the screen on YouTube here. But right up in the sky, it's there's blue sky, but there's a kind of a dark rain cloud in the middle of the blue sky. So in the middle, it's dark and grey, but around the edge of the cloud, it's got a silver bright lining. And now my eyes hurt from looking at the sun. Don't look at the sun. That's a good reminder here. Wow, I can't see anything. Okay, it's coming back. But yeah, basically around a cloud, you have a silver lining, usually, that is from the sun behind the cloud. And we use this in conversation to mean a positive thing that happens in a difficult event. So I think a really big one that I hear very often is the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure we can all remember this. Even if you're younger out there, I'm sure you have some memory of the pandemic a couple years ago. And it was obviously horrible for many reasons. Many people died and got sick. And it was a very challenging experience for all of us. And financially, maybe many of us lost our jobs and we had reduced income. For many reasons, it was a difficult time. However, I think naturally the human mind likes to see the silver lining. And I would hear many people talk about the silver lining of COVID. For example, this may not be the best example, but of course it was a horrible situation for many people. But on one hand, at least it encouraged a more balanced working lifestyle. So there are many, many jobs and careers around the world where working from home, working remotely, has become more accepted and more normal. So I wonder how many of you now work from home, either full-time or part-time. And it's probably because of COVID-19, because you were forced to work from home during that time. And then your manager, your company saw the benefits of that. So, that doesn't necessarily outweigh all the bad, of course, but it is a positive, a silver lining to see in a difficult situation. So maybe in the comments below this episode, if you go to the show notes page at levelupenglish.school, you can perhaps leave a comment and tell me something difficult that you've been through, a challenge, and also see if you can find the silver lining. Let me know what that is for you. I'm sure if you think hard enough, there is always a silver lining, no matter how small. It might be a little lining, but hopefully there is one. And just practicing thinking that way, more and more it can become a habit. So that's a nice reminder. The final one, which I've mentioned before on a previous episode, is limit your consumption of the news. You don't have to stop consuming the news, but I do think what we consume greatly affects how we see the world. If we are hearing, 2 hours every day, there's war, there's problems, there's all this stuff going on in the world, in your neighborhood, our view of the world gets so negative, right? And of course, we all know that the news focuses heavily on bad things, right? Because that's what we want to hear, I suppose. And it's not to say we should ignore that, because it's important to be aware to some extent that these bad things are happening and people are suffering and maybe we can help them in some way. But of course, it's also important to be aware that there are many good things happening that we're not hearing, right? So although the bad things are not lies, usually, there are many good things happening as well. So just be aware of that, and I think we should focus on our own mental health. It's not our responsibility to hear the news of every single country in the world all the time. We have to focus on our own mental health and happiness, and then once we do that, then we're in a better position to help other people, right? If you're going to be so pessimistic and negative with all the news that you're hearing, then you'll be in no position to help anyone. So that's one tip that I try to really carefully follow. But again, it's like a fine balance. It's not always so easy. But yeah, there's also one very interesting thing. Someone asked this question online, whether British people are more pessimistic than American people. And I think it's a really interesting topic. And the person online was saying they agree that that's true. I tend to agree as well. I think if you generally at British and American culture, in the UK, we can be quite pessimistic, right? And Americans, on the other hand, are quite optimistic and very enthusiastic. When something good happens, an American person might say like, wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Wow. Like really enthusiastically responding. But you'll very often hear in the UK, if you have a really good news, like someone's having a baby, they're getting married, they've got a promotion, the response might be like, oh, cool. Oh, good for you. Very, very nice. That's great. It kind of like they're saying it's good, but the emotion is not very obvious in their voice. And I think this is related, that in the UK, it can be a little bit awkward to be overly optimistic. And very often, Americans who are very positive and enthusiastic, they are viewed as being naive. There's that word again, naive, to British people. In other words, they're not really aware of the bad things that might be happening as well. So yeah, I think generally British people can be quite quite negative, which is it's not a great thing, is it? But it's just how it happens. I guess it also works the other way too, maybe. Like when bad news happens, when you hear bad news, Americans, maybe they're going to be more emotional and more like, oh no, that's horrible. But in the UK, it's kind of more like, oh, well, that's not great. It's a bit annoying, isn't it? And it's kind of like, not taking it so seriously. I don't know. It's just a way of dealing with bad news, I suppose. But one example with the weather. British people can be quite negative about the weather. And it could be a defense mechanism, like protecting your own expectations. So what I mean by that is if you're saying, it's going to be raining all summer, it's going to be really bad, it's going to be horrible weather, then if the weather is bad, it matches your expectations, so you won't be disappointed. And if the weather is really good, you're going to be much happier because you weren't expecting that. So I guess that's one piece of logic in being cynical. That means negative, and pessimistic. Lots of synonyms here. But yeah, generally I try to be as optimistic as I can, and I wish that British people would be more optimistic as well. But okay. I guess we'll leave it here. We're ending on a somewhat optimistic note, right? I hope you feel optimistic and positive after this episode today. I know I do. I like to think that good things are going to happen. That's my view. But hopefully you don't think I'm naive for looking at it that way. I think we can end today with a couple podcast reviews, and then I've got a great quote about optimism that we can finish on. So first of all, I want to travel to Saudi Arabia and say a quick thank you to Dima, who says, I think your podcast is so special. It offers many interesting topics. I like the way you present the information. It makes us think widely. I wish I knew your podcast a long time ago. Thank you very much for your efforts and for your nice spirit, maybe my optimistic spirit. Thank you, Dima. That's really nice of you. I'm glad you feel that way, and you didn't hear it a long time ago, but you heard it now. So I'm glad you heard it now. Thank you. Now let's travel over to China. And oh no, I have a Chinese review. I will promise, if you want to leave a review in your language, then I'll try to read it in your language. That can be one of my promises to you. But if the review is not Chinese or Japanese, then keep it short, because I won't read too much in a language I don't know. But this one, I think I can read it. So this one says, 学习英文入门记得播客. I see. Okay. 学习英文入门记得播客. So this means for learning English, it's an entry-level podcast. So I guess it's kind of suitable for beginners. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I guess that means kind of beginner level. Oh, entry level. I see. Okay. So I'm learning a new Chinese word in the review. So this is from someone, maybe Lizzie, it looks like, or someone like that. Or just some letters on their keyboard. But thank you very much for your review. Hopefully my Chinese was acceptable. But yeah, I guess we'll leave that there. So let's say a quick hello to the good old Winston Churchill. I presume this quote is from him. I know a lot of quotes get misattributed, which means they're like given to the wrong person. But I think this quote is actually from Churchill. And this says, the pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. What a fantastic quote to end on. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Once again, don't forget to check out Level Up English if you want to get lessons with me, private podcast episodes, transcripts, and much more. But yeah, thank you once again. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.